It's World Government Summit time in Dubai. Heads of government and states, as well as ministers and experts, are all here talking about energy, climate, the future of government, technology, and a whole host of other issues that could shape not just this year, but many years to come. Also, Expo's wrapping up. You're listening to the Business Extra podcast coming from the National in Abu Dhabi, although this time we're in Dubai. My name is Mustafa Alrawi, Assistant Editor-in-Chief. If you like this show, please do subscribe at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your audio content. With me is co-host and the National's feature editor, Kelsey Warner. Hi, Kelsey.
Hey, Mustafa.
So we're in a room side by side with the World Government Summit, very much in the heart of Expo. There is a lot of action here for a number of reasons.
Absolutely. We're overlooking Al Wasl Plaza. It is buzzing. So we lost Madeleine Albright this month, and I just want to take a moment, and as I listened to your intro of World Government Summit, something that was so important to her was having just normal people understand the relevance of government and the relevance of diplomacy. So I hope today we can hopefully unpack what's going on behind these closed doors, because this is a real meeting of the minds. 190 nations together in some capacity, whether that's, country leaders, heads of multinationals, whatever that is. It's 190 countries convened in some capacity talking about the biggest issues. And so what are those and what are they problem solving for?
Yeah, I want to unpack all of that. You mentioned Madeleine Albright. I urge anyone listening to go to thenationalnews.com and check out the piece by James Zogby, who wrote for our opinion pages this week. He knew Madeleine Albright, and she's a somewhat controversial figure in the Middle East, particularly with regards to US policy on Iraq. But he kind of framed it very well, her career and her legacy. So if you're interested in more of that, you can get it at our website. So World Government Summit in Dubai, as we mentioned, lots of people here. Expo's wrapping up, and it's busier than ever. Literally the last sort of few days, 48 hours maybe even, although the last day is going to be a kind of all-nighter for everyone who comes here. And I think it's a nice juxtaposition between kind of this consumer tourist, residential crowd, sort of outside the exhibition center, doing expo-y things, very festival atmosphere, kids, and then inside the exhibition center, a kind of different kind of festival. And it really is a little bit that kind of energy of people almost delighted to be in person again.
Totally.
Is really like anti-COVID right now in this site.
And pandemic, I will say, in watching the content from this week, is not looming large. I think Ukraine, Russia is really top of mind, as well as, recovery from amid an energy crunch. How are we fueling recovery when energy is so high, inflation is high, and we're amid an energy transition? I really think the story this week is talking about rising prices and the energy transition. We've moved on from the pandemic. We're just giving hugs now.
Okay. I'm glad to hear that. You mentioned the energy transition. That was sort of day zero of the World Government Summit, because it's really officially 2 days, but we had a kind of preview day. And on that day, we had a couple of comments from officials here. We had Dr. Sultan Al Jaber, who's Minister Advanced of Industry and Advanced Technology, but also the UAE's envoy on climate change, and also managing director and CEO of the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company. So his messages were very clear. On the one hand, when it comes to the energy transition, he said we need real world solutions to this. Look at what's happening outside in terms of supply and the underinvestment that we've had for a number of reasons. And his message was, don't unplug from the current system until we've built the new system.
We cannot defund, direct quote, we cannot defund the current system. This is a real challenge of timing. And the UAE this week, I do think, is sitting upon the podium really saying, we've got our ducks in a row. We have our house in order. It is the outside, as you just said, that seems to be really struggling. And the UAE says, we do have a strategy for this. We have a green portfolio. We have blue hydrogen and then green hydrogen ambitions once to follow. But they're really saying the timing right now, this is not a Ukraine-Russia issue. This is we defunded too soon on oil and gas before this happened. And so let's keep our eye on that. And so the timing of it all seems to be the big riddle.
Yes. And it's the short term versus the long term. So in another speech he made at a climate forum going on, Dr. Sultan Al Jaber also talked about sort of a measured approach to climate action. So there will be voices, and I understand where they're coming from, saying that it's too late. I mean, if you want to tackle global warming, we have to do everything yesterday. That's true, when it comes to the planet, but also when it comes to actually people and the most vulnerable people having access to affordable energy to live, that is also critical as well. And okay, people might not look at Europe and say, they're the most vulnerable, but within that subsection, there will be people who are. To your point about rising prices, it affects the poorest first.
And then the middle class. And the middle class is also enormously vulnerable as, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. And we also had on stage this week Kristalina Georgieva, the managing director of the IMF, who really laid out the debt burden on the poorest countries coming out of the pandemic. And under this modified recovery, as we're facing inflation, we're facing this energy crunch, these poorer nations are in a much worse off position than they were 2 years ago because the recovery arc is not what it was meant to be, even at the start of this year. So the poorest among us are, I think, who we need to keep top of mind in all of these conversations. And nations are also falling short of the $100 billion climate commitment we made a decade ago to these nations to help them with the transition. So we're not even getting the first steps correct, it seems.
Yes. And it's important to acknowledge where we're falling short, because, then we come up with realistic solutions. But the kind of positive, the good news, if you want to be optimistic about it, is that no one's arguing anymore that we shouldn't be doing this.
Right. So you've been on stage this week a few times. What are you hearing in terms of the conversations that you're actually moderating?
So it's sort of tangential to climate action, but may result in the biggest kind of impact, which is about ESG, what environment, social governance, which I guess for the uninitiated is the new CSR. Corporate social responsibility, which we dealt with
which
for
is
a
when
few
I came
years.
of age. So we moved on.
Yes,
all right, I am getting old.
Yeah, it's now much more than tokenism. It's much more than PR. It's much more than handing out T-shirts at the local fun run. Right? It's more than that. It's not an extension of your marketing strategy. I mean, this is the message that's coming through. So I had a one-on-one chat this morning with Alam Bajani, the chief executive of Majid Al Futtaim Holding. So on the one hand, they've made some really good PR wins, if you like, with their environmental side of things. But then he's also talking about impact and governance. So without governance, everything collapses. If you have bad governance, then the risks are huge. So that's critical for a company like his and any other company to ensure that the governance is top notch, and that with that comes transparency. Then for impact, he's talking about impact not just in terms of the community and what they're doing there, but also for every person that works at the company, of them understanding their own impact beyond, okay, I work, I get paid, I give this back. But also he made the point of, for many people, when they work at a company, they're not just giving time, they're kind of giving the best time of their life to this job, to this career.
And we seem increasingly cognizant of that fact.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's not just about total time, but I guess the quality of that time. I guess, what could you be doing?
Yeah.
With your youth.
Right. So,
right.
So yeah, with our one precious life. So from the voice of the private sector kind of held up against the Minister of Cabinet Affairs, Mohammed Al Gergawi, who made comments this morning about, government needs to wake up to aligning with the private sector and working really closely together with the private sector. So we're thinking ESGs, this cannot just be the responsibility of boardrooms, because they will not always work in the planet's best interest, by no means. I mean, as much as we want to believe that shareholders and stakeholders have equal voice in the room, that's not going to be the case for every single company on the planet. Yeah. And so Mr. Al Gergawi, his statements this morning, I thought really the signal I heard in those words were government needs to wake up to work with private sector. What we saw from the SEC in the US last week around reporting on your climate risk, and how are we going to report? If you're a publicly traded company, how are you going to disclose your climate exposure? We are starting to learn how to measure, and we're learning how to hold companies accountable, and we have to. If we don't, we will fail. And so governments really do have to be upright on this.
So Kristen Seaman, who runs ESG for GM, General Motors, out of Detroit, one of the big Detroit car makers, who haven't necessarily been synonymous with things like environment, social governance over the years. It's her day to day. And she was saying that it's impact with profit. So, okay, we had a period where there was this theory, there's a Milton Friedman theory of if you go after profit, it will smooth out everything. Because to be profitable requires you ultimately to be a good actor. It turned out to be rubbish. I mean, we can see that. So we need a new kind of economic theory. The World Economic Forum would call it stakeholder capitalism. I think the great sort of economic rivalry between people like Friedman and Klaus Schwab, who founded the World Economic Forum, was on this point. But also, I think you can't get around the short-term consideration. It isn't just about geopolitics or conflict or energy crisis. That shareholders, by their very nature, who are just one stakeholder, you have employees, you have customers, you have other, regulators, you have whoever. But shareholders demand to get paid, right? I mean, in the end, it's still America, still want my money, right? So, I think that on the one hand might sound like, okay, well then, of course, we're not going to make progress on this. But then on the other hand, it's kind of like, if you do accept that bargain, that you have to be sustainable, but sustainable also means you make money too.
Right. But the bargain is becoming increasingly life or death. So I do think that we're starting to understand I won't get paid if I'm not even here anymore. So it is, I think, starting to be understood as a genuine existential risk where companies do need to pair profit with purpose. Otherwise, we are really all going to bleep in a handbasket on this if we don't get our house in order.
Yeah, it was funny having that discussion today because it did feel like when we talk about ESG and this big panel, as I mentioned, GM, Pepsi, KKR, BlackRock, amongst the voices, and it did feel like everyone in the room was on the same page. I mean, we weren't trying to like change hearts and minds here.
Yeah.
It was, everyone was in the choir, kind of, to use a cliche.
I mean, similarly, the conversations this week around the future of cash, I think the other big component of this week's program is the acceleration on the conversation of decentralized finance, the future of, maybe a stable coin or a central bank backed currency. We have gone into like warp speed on that conversation. 2 years ago when the World Government Summit was convening kind of pre-pandemic, the world was still trying to wrap its mind around Bitcoin and what Bitcoin was. And that we've so left that far behind. And now it's about how are governments coming to the table in this world of high volatility and very limited public trust. How are we actually building a currency for the future that works for all people? That is a really, really exciting conversation. And it speaks to what you're saying around no one in the room really needs to be convinced anymore. It's more now we're in problem solving mode around this issue.
I think one of the biggest problems is that DeFi, decentralized finance, essentially this new world of monetary exchange that the arrival of Bitcoin, 12 years ago, 12 years ago now, maybe longer, 14 years, heralded the start of, and we began to understand the opportunities and the potential. People still think that it's early days, it's nascent, we don't need to get into it. And okay, we've had some big news stories over the last week. Binance, other crypto exchanges setting up in Dubai, for example, regulation coming in all over the region. But there's an urgent race here, because if anybody does any kind of little interaction with Web 3.0 and the kind of ease with which it's supposed to say help people get paid directly for what they're doing, the barriers, the geographic barriers are there because the existing financial system has been built on barriers and gatekeepers. And so if you're in the UAE and you think there's a great tool that I want to use in the US, because in between you and that Web 3.0 app is the traditional financial system. If you don't have a US credit card, you can't use it.
Right.
Your wallet cannot connect to that app because you're in the UAE and they don't bank with you.
So what I'm noticing is a real sophistication around this very debate.
But let me finish the worry, the thing I'm really worried about.
What are you worried about?
Who will resolve this really, really fast? Who will break down barriers and ensure that people can be connected because this is going to move really, really quickly. There's a reason why Facebook wanted to start its own cryptocurrency, because, the big tech companies, the 4 or 5 of them, have already created their own global footprints where they don't need to worry about the barriers because they've become gatekeepers themselves.
Right. So the question, though, is it's stable coins versus central bank digital currencies. Are we going to be living in a world of stable coins, which are the proffering of the likes of Facebook, and so then they're just up for regulation? Or are we going to be beholden to these CBDCs, the central bank-backed currencies? So these are the 2 roads we're kind of facing right now. And that's the conversation that's really playing out this week here in Dubai, is which road do we want to back? Because Facebook failed. Libra actually, had to pull up stakes.
It's not that it failed because they couldn't execute. The political cost of trying it
no, the market,
was too great.
The market said, no, thank you.
Yeah.
There's not enough underlying trust here for you to stand up.
But it should be a warning to everyone that they wanted to do it.
Yes.
The very fact that they tried to do it should terrify everybody.
The learning is they tried. The lesson is they failed because of the lack of trust. And so, again, we've been talking about trust recently, but this really does become a question of trust. And do people in this modern day trust their central banks, or do they trust a large corporation? And it feels like the prevailing thing right now is actually we're veering towards corporations. We're veering private sector. That feels like the trend right now.
I want to see regional, Middle East, North Africa, Web 3.0 applications. I want to see them fast. I want to see them yesterday. I don't want to have to be waiting for, these globalized companies to come and give me access to something that somebody should be able to give me here right now. I mean, like, I try and access different apps. There's 100 different wallets to use. I can't use any of them.
I'm just trying to order a rug pad on Amazon right now. And can't even do that for less than $100.
Right. So the future's here for sure. It is here. But I think the debate over, whether it should be a stable coin or a central bank-backed digital currency is almost a red herring, because, what does it matter if we're exchanging marbles, right? As long as the system, the infrastructure is there to seamlessly exchange them, right?
You sound like the co-founder of Tether who was talking this morning about this on stage.
I get that a lot.
Yeah. You're welcome. It depends on what camp you're in, but also, it just needs to be built.
Yes.
To the victor will go the spoils. So whether a government shows up first or a company, that's who will get to play the game. So far, the EU, China, Tether have come to the table. And those are the sort of examples we're beginning to see in the digital currency space. But there is a vast market to still be tapped.
Yes. And I think we've learned no lessons. Okay, I have to say, people listening out there that are in the Middle East, we've learned no lessons about anything to do with technology, because, the software is still the preview of the US. We've allowed Silicon Valley to kind of, run everything. And you know what it is? It's convenience. We've been really seduced by the fact, well, Microsoft Word is a great program. We'll just keep using that. We don't need a Middle East version of Microsoft Word. We'll just buy it in. It's easier. But the point is, it's the innovation that it would lead to. It's the jobs to programmers. All the things that we want to do. We're bringing companies here and we're incubating them, and we're trying to kind of create our own ecosystem. But it kind of begins with saying, no, I want to be first. I want to be better than. I don't want to copy the US. I want to be better than the US.
And original. Yeah. You're speaking to a real intrinsic originality.
Yeah, I hope so. I think we need it. I mean, hopefully this time next year at the next World Government Summit, which will be at a different venue, no doubt, we will see more of that kind of indigenous Web 3.0, whether that applies to decentralized finance or anything else, that there are more options, native options, that we can take up here. Kelsey Warner, that's enough from me, I think.
Me as well. Thank you.
Thanks so much. All that remains to thank our production team, Arthur Edison and Aisha Khan, and you all for listening.